Hello everyone. So let's talk about the potential of remastering Sonic Lost World. I see people looking at me and asking me why this game. Let me be clear. Lost World is not one of my favorite Sonic games, and quite frankly, the game isn't one I hold in high regard. It's not bad, it's alright in most areas. Well, it did give us this funny line.
What I meant to say is, I'm so sorry that you have nothing more important to do in life.
However, if we're talking about a remaster game, ironically, the potential of Sonic Lost World Remaster is higher than any 3D Sonic game in the past 15 years. I'm not kidding. You'll see why throughout this video. I know fans are saying Lost World shouldn't get remastered because of its critical misreception, but honestly, it's kinda biased, not gonna lie. By that logic, we shouldn't be clamoring for Unleashed to be remastered, a game that has worse critical reviews in comparison. We should look at the potential of a game that could really benefit from a remaster, even if we don't like the original game in the first place. Another reason why I believe Lost World should get remastered is because it's on a console that most people didn't have. Yes, it's on PC, but that will only appeal to the people who prefer PC, most likely hardcore gamers instead of casuals or people who just don't care about PC. Finally, its potential. The thing about Lost World is that in terms of mechanics, it plays very similar to Frontiers. The control layouts play similar to each other minus the combat and refined controls of Frontiers. You can unironically make the argument that Lost World is the beta of Frontiers, especially when you compare the Zelda DLC of Lost World to Kronos Island of Frontiers. Having a remaster of a game that most people didn't own back then to play similar to another game that is both critically and financially successful will be great for Lost World itself and could set the standard of future remasters in the Sonic franchise going forward. Okay, let's talk about fixing and improving mechanics. Let's talk about the controls of the game. Sonic's base movement should be tweaked to be almost one-to-one to Sonic's base movement in Frontiers, where the movements are not stiff anymore. There's still a run button in the game, but Sonic's base speed is faster than before without it. Spin dash is back and powerful as it was in Lost World, but on top of that we now have a drop dash, which theoretically will work tremendously for the game. The charge homing attack doesn't take as long to charge now, and the pause after doing a homing kick takes up less time now. You can't really change much of the actual physics to be momentum based in the game because the level design doesn't support it. However, I do want at the very least Sonic to have some forward momentum with his spin dash after a double jump, which should be changed to his ball horn. Also, his bounce bracelet should be indefinite and not cancel out after the third bounce. Lost World doesn't have great level design that complements the controls, but I think it would be cool to rather focus on the speed of Sonic, which means that we are bringing back the ranking system for the levels and bosses. Seeing how Orders and especially Frontiers rejuvenated the speedrunning aspect of Sonic fans in the mainstream light again, I think Lost World will definitely benefit from having a ranking system and leaderboards. The boss fights with the Deadly Six are now slightly more difficult and take more hits to beat them. Let's be honest, Lost World has one of the worst storylines in all of Sonic, and we really can't change or rewrite Sonic Lost World's story entirely since this is a remaster. However, the fun part is that you can do something special with a remaster, and this is actually my final reason why Lost World should be remastered. And use side story mode. Having a side story mode honestly warrants why this game should get remastered. This side mode would take huge inspiration from another Wii U game that was remastered, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. Before we go further in detail about that comparison, let's talk about the story of this mode. For starters, this story takes place after the base game, but Sonic isn't a playable character. Instead, it will be Metal Sonic. For objective reasons, Metal Sonic wouldn't play any differently from Sonic aside from a few differences which will be easier for the developers to make. For subjective reasons, my boy Metal Sonic has been disrespected long enough and deserves his respect. Metal Sonic used to be so cool and threatening. Now, he's just a glorified badnik. The sad thing is that Metal Sonic is thematically Sonic's most deadliest rival, but he lost what made him menacing from the 90s and early 2000s. I believe this side mode will assure why he's Sonic's deadliest rival, because he gets to fight against the Deadly Six. Since he will be the protagonist of this mode, we can restore him being awesome again. Not only that, it's a villain versus villain story. This series has never done that outside of the comics. Now I will talk about the story. Before the events of the base game, when Eggman met the Deadly Six and realized they can take control of his robots, he started developing a prototype anti-Zeti virus code for his robots. Do you guys remember the Super Rockman Adventure game or storyline from the Mega Man comics where Dr. Light developed a protective coding just so that Mega Man code wouldn't fall under the control of Raw Moon? Yeah, it's pretty much like that. However, due to it being a prototype, the code can only be transferred to one robot and it has a time limit. Now, Metal Sonic did accompany Eggman to the Lost Hex before the events of the original game to inspect it, but he wasn't used due to Eggman having to team up with Sonic in the main story, which led to Metal being left abandoned on the planetoid. Also, Zavok demonstrated his power of controlling robots to Eggman by controlling Metal first. Keep that in mind for later. The story of the side mode starts with Metal Sonic encased in the tube with that protective coating, going online in a secret laboratory Eggman built inside the forest. Once he leaves the tube, Eggman calls Metal Sonic through the latter's built-in radio to tell him that he needs to get off Lost Hex immediately before the Zeddy could find and control him. There was an egg shuttle for him to take home, but due to unforeseen circumstances, it would have to land in Sky Road. Metal Sonic's goal is to simply escape the planetoid, and that's the story of this side mode, Metal Hex. How this side mode would play is very similar to the gameplay loop of an island from Sonic Frontiers. It's a small playground for the player to run around and fight some badniks. The combat is borrowed for Sonic Frontiers even though we have new moves like Metal Sonic's Blast Shield, which is his perfect parry, and his Plasma Pulse Attack. There are many bosses that play similar to the Guardians from Frontiers, like a huge Motorbug replacing Caterpillar, and a huge Buzz Bomber replacing Swift, for example. The gameplay loop is just like Frontiers, but it's more of a mini Frontiers. You beat some enemies, collect a certain amount of flickies from the enemies and mini bosses so you can go to a warp ring. That sounds like 3D Blast when I think about it. Which would take you to a traditional Lost World level. These levels are just remixed and composed, but more difficult versions of the regular levels in the game. Getting the highest ranks would grant you the most gold keys to fight the big boss of the area, which are the members of the Zeddy. Although you can find gold keys through other methods like exploring the zone or mini challenges similar to the ones for Frontiers or even Dream Team. There's only 4 zones, which are just open zone equivalents to Silent Forest, Desert Ruins, Frozen Factory, and Sky Road in that order. What's cool about this mode is that Eggman accompanies Metal Sonic via the latter's internal communicator. In the open zones, Eggman actually will commentate on things you will see in the zones that actually reflect upon the lore, or in Lost World's case, create lore for the Zeddy and the Lost Hex. It's no different from Sonic Friends commentating on the stuff you will find back on the Starfall Islands. In terms of the story, the Deadly Six's goal is to simply stop Metal Sonic from returning home and controlling him to help them take over the Earth. However, due to Eggman's anti-Zeddy code, they couldn't fully control him, at least for now. So the alternative, which is just destroy Metal Sonic, is decided upon by Zavok. The bosses, as mentioned before, are the Deadly Six. Now, you only fight 4 of the Zeddy through the actual boss fights. The 2 that you don't fight at the end of the open zone are Zor and Zaman. In the story, Zaman and Zor were the first ones to notice that Metal escaped. In the tutorial stage of the mode, which is aesthetically similar to Honey Highway, has you fighting Zaman at the halfway point, which is just a rehash of his first boss fight from the main game. The end of the tutorial level ends with a rehash of Zor's first fight from the base game. Now the other members are when you fight them at the end of each zone. These boss fights from a story, character, and gameplay perspective are going to be the highlights of Metal Hex in its entire remaster. This is because, taking note from the Titan fights and Frontiers, these fights have a lot of cinematic aspects to them, being the QTEs, which shows the dynamic between Metal and each member of the Zeddy. To start off, Metal doesn't have much of a grudge against Zaman and Zor because these two don't really have the mental capacity to care about Metal Sonic. That's why they are the sideline to be tutorial bosses. It doesn't get that crazy yet with Zeke because his fight is just a remix of his second boss fight from the main game, where now there's a preceding phase where Metal Sonic is running in a 2D session dodging Zeke's watermelon blades, which is very similar to the first night encounter. However, Zeke's dynamic with Metal has more aggression since he shows off his robot racism towards Metal Sonic, and the latter ain't having that mess. The fight does end with a very simple but funny QTE where Zeke charges at Metal, but the latter just pimp slaps him to a geyser that sends his Zeddy member into a swamp of alligators from Silent Forest. Now with Zaz, Xena, and Zavok are when the fights get ballistic. With Zaz, phase 1 of the fight is just a no-holds-barred fist fight similar to the ninja fights from Frontiers. Phase 2 of the fight is reminiscent of the rival encounter where he rides his moon mech across the desert. To defeat him, just pair the star-shaped missiles back in the mech where he's in front of you, and when you get on the moon mech, just beat him senseless. The dynamic between Metal and Zaz is very bloodlusted because they're both physically on par with each other. This is true when you consider what Sonic says about Zaz being the bruiser of the Zeddy in IDW, and he would actually be enjoying the fight when he and Metal Sonic trades blows on the moon mech. The visual of these two trading blows with each other will be comparable to the Donkey Kong Jungle Beat boss fights. Zaz would taunt Metal Sonic until the very last minute where the latter ultimately wins, which would send the former into a psychotic rage crit. The QTE to finish the Zaz fight has Metal Sonic dodges all of Zaz's star missiles before punching him off his moon mech. Once Zaz lands back on the ground and has his psychopathic breakdown, Metal Sonic momentarily rides Zaz's moon mech like a hoverboard before kicking it to Zaz where he's crushed by it. After all that, Metal Sonic wags his finger. Xena's boss fight gets even more epic. So her phase 1 is very similar to Zaz's phase 1, but Xena actually will use Psychokinesis. I know she doesn't have that, but all the daily sets have nothing to offer for the movesets in terms of variety, so since she's from the ice world of the game, why not give her ice powers? Also, ice powers are cool, and she used her Psychokinesis against Metal Sonic. Just find a moment where she's vulnerable or fatigued from using her powers to defeat her. In phase 2, she gets in this huge snowman robot similar to the size of Asura and will shoot ice bombs that can freeze Metal Sonic. Getting through this phase is just the same as defeating Asura. Xena's QTE has her robot throwing metal to the sky before summoning this gigantic icicle above him to fall, while also crystallizing Metal Sonic in place for it to fall on him. Just before Xena could crush Metal Sonic with an icicle, the latter burns out of his ice prison and Sky dives back down. Out of desperation, Xena summons an ice force shield to block Metal Sonic from trying to reach her, but he pushes through, grabs Xena by her hair, takes her off the robot, goes to the ground to do this. Before flying towards a floating icicle and rams her through it. The remains of the crystal falls onto the snowman robot, destroying in the process with Xena flying the ruins of it defeated as Metal Sonic confidently shrugs off some snow that was on him. Metal's rivalry with Xena would be even more intense than Zaz, since Xena would probably give Metal the same amount, if not more trouble in their fight. Also, she will be irritated during this fight since in the IW comics, she does not want to get her hands dirty, and this so-called hunk of junk beating her in the fight will make her go over the edge. Before we move on to the final boss, which is Zavok, there's one thing I want to talk about, and that is how Metal is portrayed during these fights. I know that Metal is just famously known as the silent assassin type, but he is based off Sonic. Let him flex a little bit, which is something he hasn't really done since CD or the original Sonic movie. I feel like Metal Sonic's smugness can be shown off in the QTE finishing animations of these boss fights, which I think it would be really cool to see him wag his finger against Zaz, for example. Now, let's talk about the final boss, which is Zavok. The first phase of this fight is just similar to the first phases of Zaz and Xena's fights, but much tougher, and Zavok could actually bypass some of the anti-Zeti virus code where he can temporarily stop Metal Sonic in his place. This is due to the efficiency of the code starting to run out. After getting to phase 1, Zavok summons his mech dragon and the fight goes into the mechanics of the Wyvern fight, where he can parry his missiles back at the dragon as you fight to the ruins of Sky Road. Phase 2 QTEs will have the dragon swiping its tail to send Metal Sonic to the skies. Zavok's dragon fires an energy beam at Metal, but the latter dodges it and charges through the robot, destroying the process. However, we go to phase 3, where we are now in a huge flying flat arena as Zavok grows gigantic, where this fight is reminiscent of Giganto. Just beat him senseless. The QTE here will end with Zavok trying to crush Metal Sonic with his bare hands, along with trying to bypass the coding of the anti-Zeti fireball, which he was dangerous, I mean dangerous close to doing so and controlling a Metal Sonic. However, through just pure willpower, Metal Sonic breaks out of Zavok's grasp before the latter fires a gigantic fireball. Metal Sonic barely reflects the fireball with his black shield back at Zavok, who struggles to withhold against it so it wouldn't crush him. Using this opportunity, Metal Sonic charges through the fireball with his force shield still on and does a solo team blast attack from heroes just so the fireball can finally put Zavok down, with the fight ending with this huge explosion with Metal Sonic coming away from it, not looking back at it like the true MVP he is. Whew. I got goosebumps from that. The story mode ends with Metal Sonic successfully reaching the X shuttle along with the captured flickies that you collected from the gameplay, so that they can be roboticized under Eggman's control and go back to Earth. It's dark, I know, but honestly, it's fitting since you do collect them throughout the zones to progress through the game. One thing I need to talk about is the dynamic between Metal Sonic and Zavok. This is definitely the most hated rivalry between these two characters. Zavok takes some hot shots at Metal Sonic during the first two phases of the fight by stating that he is not the real Sonic and just a robot that would just serve people, alluding to Eggman and hopefully himself, which, yeah, that can really push Metal Sonic's buttons. However, Zavok is, in fact, enraged at this clone robot who is a copy of the guy who beat him just a day ago, as taking out everyone in his group in an admittedly gruesome way, and that did a lot of irreparable damage to Zavok's pride in his race. And by phase 3, it's no longer trying to put the other one down. These two just want to eviscerate each other. The goal of the story mode at the end of the day is to give respect to these villains. The Deadly Six definitely are low on people's villain list, but this is a way for them to be legitimately intimidating for the most part, at least in the games. For Metal Sonic, this is pretty much his undefeatable or breakthrough it all moment and restore him to his former glory. One cool detail is that throughout the story, Metal eyes are green as a visual indicator that the code is effective, and a cool nod to his organic counterpart. But after he breaks out Zavok's grasp in the QTE of the final boss, his eyes are gone back to his iconic red eyes. Okay, let's start wrapping things up. Going back to the Metal Hex boss fights, obviously, this game is equivalent to the Titan fights from Sonic Frontiers. That means the music should be metal as hell, right? Well, not exactly, for the most part. The first two boss fights with Zomon and Zord use the Lego boss themes, while Z gets an orchestrated arrangement. However, Zaz gets a heavy metal remix of the Deadly Six theme where it's trying to emulate the feel of Breakthrough It All, as Xena gets that same arrangement but now with more choir bells and piano missing to it just to give it a demonic Christmas vibe to it. The final boss music with Zavok is an orchestrated heavy metal arrangement that misses Zavok's theme and the American version of Stardust Speedway Bad Future with lyrics. I know people think that Quinn or Holmes should be behind the vocals, which would be great and consistent with Frontiers, but honestly, we can use new blood. Brandon Yates of Death Battle fame will be a great addition to Sonic Singers, especially if you listen to Hedge of Tomorrow. God, that's such a banger. For both the regular game and Metal Hex, they should have multiple slave slots, and beating Metal Hex allows you to play as Metal Sonic in the base game. If anyone were to develop this game, probably far-fetched, and I would say this for any remaster of a 3D Sonic game in the future, but why not Sega Harlight? At the Dream Team, I feel like they'd be capable and probably could be typecasted as a team for developing remasters for Sonic. What do you guys think? That was my video of the potential of a Sonic Lost World remaster, or Sonic Lost World plus Metal Hex. The topic of this game getting a remaster is controversial, but like I said before, I'd rather look at the potential of a remaster and see what we can do with it, and not give it one simply because of bias against it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. In a joking sense, we can add another Ryu game that gets remastered for the Switch.